Hi. So next week I am going off on my summer vacation, going away for 2 weeks in sunny Burgundy, which is nice. And before I go, I thought I might share some thoughts with you about world building that have been travelling round and round my head for the last few days from my garden here in the French countryside. And what I could do is I could spend a few minutes explaining to you this lovely setting, talking to you about the geese who are probably going to start making some noise in a few moments, and explaining to you that there is a grain silo just over there, and so there's going to be noisy tractors going backwards and forwards, and I'll have to come closer to the camera for you to be able to hear what I'm saying. And explain to you all about the field in the background that floods several times a year and all of that sort of thing. But if I did that, I would be doing exactly the same thing as a lot of you do when you should be getting on with telling your story. I call it story world anxiety. What it is the fear in the writer that the reader is not going to be able to understand the story, the reader's not going to be able to get to grips with or settle into or picture the events of the story if you don't first tell them all about where the story takes place. So it would be very much as if I were to talk to you all about where I am right now in my garden. If I were to talk to you all about the stuff that I can see, and the birds twittering, and the sun which is starting to get brighter and brighter, when what I ought to be doing is talking to you about how much your reader really needs to know about where your story takes place before you can tell the story. Because the reality is that even by the time the reader gets to the end of your story, the reader doesn't need to know as much about the story world as you do. In fact, the reader barely needs to know 10% of what you know about the story when the reader gets to the end of the last chapter. So you can imagine that by the end of the first chapter, the reader doesn't even need to know 1% about the story world, about the background. What I'm really getting at here is that for the reader to keep reading your book, and that's what I'm really interested in, for the reader to keep reading your book, what the reader needs to get as early as possible, in as much detail as possible, is the story. The reader needs to be able to have a picture of what kind of story it is. The reader needs to get an idea of what the experience of reading your book is going to be like. The reader needs to know who it's about and have some idea of what that person is going to do. If you are focused on those details, but you also know all the information about the background, so if you are focused on those details, but you also know that there are cows in the field behind me, and you also know, as I do, that there are geese in their enclosure in front of me who have kept remarkably quiet as I'm saying all of this, that is, if you as the author know those details, then when they become relevant or when they become useful, you will bring them in. So if I had some point that I needed to make which would be usefully or helpfully illustrated by reference to the geese, at that point I could mention the geese, and at that point the audience would know that the geese existed. So here's something that you don't know is in my field of view, and that because it's I suppose it's an interesting and erratic detail in my French country garden, I might be able to use it to express some important, I'm thinking as I talk now, to express some important point about the way that the background has to tell the story by using it as a means of illustrating. And I guess it's a matter of, I suppose you could call it a matter of preparation or of maintenance, of using the imaginative space in which your story takes place for more than one purpose. The fact is, just over here is where I hang out my washing, and it's all jeans at the moment. You may have noticed I wear quite a lot of denim. It's all jeans at the moment, so it's completely the wrong colour for all this lovely greenery there is around me, and that means that I could use it as a strong or as a powerful unexpected contrast by describing it, by showing something that is significantly different from the background. What I can do is I can get a lot of extra information across about the world around me, and I can use that as a means of driving my story. So your story world does not serve the purpose of being the setting in which your story takes place. That's not what it's for. Your story world is there to provide support to the story when the story needs it. So your story world is there to ensure, to pick up an image I like to use a lot, it's there to ensure that when a character needs to sit down to have a think, that there will be the trunk of a fallen tree behind him. That's what the story world is for. So don't even think about telling the reader about the story world until you need the story world to provide something to the story. So there you go. I'm sure I shall enjoy my holiday, and I hope that this completely improvised video has been of some use to you. These are all of the things that have been churning in my head as I've worked on a few last-minute things this week. And I will see you, well, there'll be a couple of, I'll be putting 2 YouTubes out, one next week, one the week after, that are pre-recorded, obviously, because they're all pre-recorded. But I'm going to record some new stuff when I get back, and I think I've got a few announcements as well. So bye-bye, and enjoy your vacations if you're going anywhere as well.